Hey, family, and per usual, Black love, Black pride, Black power. You have to know yourself, to love your people, and don't get mad, get right. So, with that being said, this is going to be another one of those touchy subjects because people have a hard time dealing with reality. We're just gonna dive right in it. The importance of self-ID. Before I even get to my notes, what I wrote out and planned for you guys today, let me start by quoting Marcus Garvey, okay? A person without knowledge of self is like a tree with no roots. And y'all hear me all the time. I talk about you gotta know yourself. You gotta know yourself to love yourself. You gotta know yourself to love yourself to love your people. I open every video with it. Whenever I'm talking to youth, I make sure they know that. Whenever I'm talking to people in general, that is a very core belief of mine. You have to know yourself to love your people. So, the importance of self-identification is so important because being able to take authority and claiming who you are in reality, of course, is a sign of knowledge of self. And it's going to be easier for you to self-identify if you know yourself. And it's going to be a lot more understandable and easier for you to identify as and be proud of what you identify as, because it'll be in a direct correlation of who you know yourself and now love yourself to be. So let's jump in. Diasporic African people have a unique problem. Over the course of the past several hundred years, we have allowed our colonizers to tell us who we are and how we should identify with tools like the one-drop rule, miseducation, societal branding, and more. Once we were taken captive, they immediately began to strip us of our identity, leaving us with two options: create our own or depend on them to give it to us. Clearly, we've chosen the latter. To believe that we have not qualified or that we are not qualified or capable of to determine for ourselves who we are. We've allowed them to demonize, distance, and distract. I repeat, demonize, distance, and distract us from who we are. And the results are African people willing to accept that they are anything but African. And the whole diaspora suffers from this as well, not to be confused with not wanting to be black. That's a different and more delicate situation when it comes to other African people of the diaspora not wanting to identify as black. That's a different video in itself. But we see this stuff manifest all the time with black people wanting to be Creole or Latino or Native American or anything else, Hebrew, or anything else but black, but African, And as an African person, we have the rights, we have the authority, we have the capability, we have the psychological capacity to choose who's on the team and who's not. And the standard for membership is Africanness, period. Genetic Africanness. We have already established in the past video that only black love makes black people. Only African love makes African people, as I'm revising for this particular piece, okay? And that's it. That's the standard. You are African if you have two undeniably African parents. Now, whether those parents are, one is black and the other is Jamaican, or one is black Haitian and the other is Ugandan, or one is Ghanaian and the other is Afro-Costa Rican, or one's Nigerian and the other is Congolese, or one is an African person who was raised in Europe and the other one is an African person who was raised in the States. If you've got two African parents, then you are an African person. It does not matter what kind of African, they just both have to be African. I do think, this is my personal, there are people out there much stricter than I am, but I do think that there is room for black passing. And I'm not talking about Rachel Dolezal black passing, which, by the way, she was biracial passing. I am talking about Malcolm X black passing, okay? If you have a mix, i.e. a half African and half non-African parent, and an African parent, you are black passing. Congratulations, grab a jersey, have a seat on the bench, welcome to the team. Okay, if you are an African person or a half African person and you do not reproduce with an African person, your child is not on the team, okay? And neither are you. I'm sorry, but the line has got to be drawn somewhere, and loyalty to African people is that somewhere. Biracial people are biracial. If they want different for their child, then for their child, they will have to choose a side to reproduce with. That does not mean that this biracial person has to pick a side of who they are. It means that they, for their next reproduction legacy or whatever, they've got to make a decision if they want different for their child. If you are biracial and you don't want to pick a side for your child, then date and reproduce biracial. So basically, in summary, 75%. If you pass with 75%, you pass with me. You pass with a C, you pass with me. No one drop rule. No, you are your father's child BS. No, none of that shit. It's as simple as math and DNA. There is no argument. Hashtag Young Pharaoh. Hashtag don't debate me. Okay, there's no way around it. If you don't got two African parents, then you are not an African person. If you have a partially African parent or a half African parent and an African parent, you are you are African passing, you are on the team, and it is up to you on whether or not you want to actually be on the team or not. If you have a mixed parent and an African parent and you reproduce with the African person, that child is on the team. If you have a mixed parent and an African parent and you decide to reproduce with a non-African, that child is on the biracial squad. Just how it works. Just look at the numbers. Just look at it's just basic fractions and ratios here. If you have a biracial parent and an African parent and you get with the African person, you create a me, which is what many of us diasporically are. And if it is the other way around, then you create something else, which is not me, which is cool. It's just not on the team. Don't get a jersey. And also your jersey is revoked because of the fact that you have chose up and you didn't choose us, which is cool. Do you off the team over there. Okay? And African people, before you decide to try and argue with me about this, please make sure your protest is coming from a place of rationality and self-love. Because if you're coming from a place where you're thinking logically, rationally, and realistically, then there will be no argument. However, if you are coming at me irrationally and with your bucket of self-hate to where you feel like you're not worth anything unless you can identify with people who cannot, will not, and will never identify with you, then your argument just proves my point further and it is not valid. Attention, African people who want to be anything else but African, especially those suffering in the diaspora, because it's kind of harder to have this problem continentally. Please, just save the bullshit for someone else. I don't have the energy. My comment section does not have the energy. My email, message box, anything that has to do with me does not have the energy to deal with that. It's too exhausting. It's too consuming. The standard is set. The standard is set by African people, and the standard is set by that. And Africanness is the standard. It is what it is. If you don't like it, don't blame me. Blame your parents. And hell, the rest of us actual black people out here who want to be anything but black can't even blame them either. Blame white supremacy. In fact, don't blame me, blame white supremacy for getting you all fucked up in here to think differently. But with that being said, as usual, this is all being said with a place of love, understanding, and realistic, practical, tangible logic. With that being said, Black love, Black pride, Black power. You have to know yourself, to love your people. Peace.